They say blood is thicker than water, but nobody tells you what happens when that blood turns ice cold and cuts you deeper than any stranger ever could. And I'm about to tell you exactly how my own mother's hand across my face became the catalyst for the most unexpected comeback story you'll ever hear. Because sometimes the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally are the same ones who'll toss you out like yesterday's trash when you dare to choose yourself over their outdated expectations. My name is Jenna Martinez, and I was 22 years old when my mother decided I wasn't her daughter anymore. 22! Fresh out of college with a business degree I'd worked my butt off for, ready to take on the world. And she wanted me to throw it all away for Roberto Castellano, a 40-year-old businessman with a receding hairline, a potbelly, and connections that made my parents salivate like hungry dogs at a barbecue. See, my family wasn't rich, but we weren't dirt poor either. We were that awkward middle-class kind of family that desperately wanted to climb the social ladder, and apparently I was the rung they planned to step on to get there. Roberto came from old money, the kind of family that had their fingers in real estate, restaurants, and probably some shady stuff nobody talked about at Sunday dinner. My mom had been pushing this arrangement since I turned 21, dropping hints like bombs at every family gathering, and I had been dodging them like I was in some kind of twisted game of matrimonial dodgeball. "Jana, mija, you need to think about your future," she'd say, her voice dripping with that particular brand of manipulation that only mothers seem to master. "Roberto is a good man, stable, successful, he'll take care of you." Take care of me? I had 2 working hands, a sharp brain, and enough ambition to fuel a rocket ship. But according to her, none of that mattered because I had a uterus, and apparently that meant I needed some man to validate my existence. My dad just sat there during these conversations, hiding behind his newspaper like it was a shield, pretending he couldn't hear the way my dreams were being auctioned off to the highest bidder. I'd met Roberto exactly 3 times, and each time he looked at me like I was a prize mare he was considering purchasing, his eyes wandering over me in a way that made my skin crawl and my stomach turn. He talked about himself nonstop, bragged about his cars, his houses, his portfolio, and when I tried to mention my own career aspirations, he literally patted my hand and said, "That's cute, but we won't need to work once we're married." That right there should have been enough for any sane parent to pump the brakes, but not my mother. No, she just saw dollar signs and social status dancing in her head like sugar plum fairies. The final showdown happened on a Sunday afternoon in March, one of those deceptively beautiful days where the sun is shining and everything looks perfect from the outside, but inside, a hurricane is about to tear through your entire existence. We were having dinner. They called it dinner, but it was more like an ambush. My mom had invited Roberto without telling me, and there he was, sitting at our dining table like he already owned the place, wearing this smug smile that made me want to throw my plate at his face. "Jenna," my mother started, her voice sugary sweet but with that edge that told me something bad was coming, "Roberto has something he wants to ask you." I looked at this man, this stranger who thought he could buy his way into my life, and I felt this rage building in my chest like a volcano about to erupt. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a rin box, actually got down on one knee right there in my parents' dining room, and asked me to marry him in front of everyone, like I was supposed to just swoon and say yes because that's what good daughters do. "No," I said, and the word hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. "Absolutely not." You could have heard a pin drop in that moment. The silence was so thick, you could cut it with a knife. Roberto's face went from confident to confused to angry in about 3 seconds flat, and my mother's expression morphed into something I'd never seen before. Pure, undiluted fury mixed with embarrassment. "Excuse me?" she hissed, her voice low and dangerous, the kind of tone that used to make me hide under my bed as a kid. "Jenna Maria Martinez, what did you just say?" I stood up from the table, my legs shaking but my voice steady, and I said it again. "No, I'm not marrying him. I don't love him. I barely know him, and I have my own plans for my life that don't include being some man's trophy wife." That's when everything went to hell faster than a snowball rolling downhill in July.
My mother shot up from her chair so fast it nearly toppled over, her face turning this alarming shade of red that would have been comical if the situation wasn't so intense. "You ungrateful little bitch," she spat, and those words hit me like physical blows because I'd never heard her talk to me like that before. "After everything we've done for you, after we put you through college, fed you, clothed you, give you a roof over your head, this is how you repay us?" I tried to explain that I was grateful, that I loved them, but that didn't mean I had to sacrifice my entire future to make them happy. But she wasn't hearing any of it. Roberto had gotten up by then, his ego clearly bruised, muttering something about not needing this disrespect, and my dad was still just sitting there, still hiding, still refusing to take a side or stand up for his own daughter. "Mom, please," I remember saying, my voice cracking. "I just want to live my own life, make my own choices. That doesn't mean I don't love you." But love wasn't enough for her, apparently. Obedience was the currency she valued, and I was bankrupt. "You're a disgrace," she yelled, her voice echoing through our small house, and I felt something inside me break that I didn't even know could break. A complete disgrace to this family. Roberto had left by then, slamming the door so hard the pictures on the wall rattled, but my mother wasn't done, not even close. She got right up in my face, so close I could see every line of disappointment etched into her features, and she said things that would haunt me for years to come. She called me selfish, stupid, foolish, said I was throwing away the opportunity of a lifetime, that I'd never amount to anything without a man like Roberto to take care of me. Each word was designed to cut, to wound, to make me doubt every decision I'd ever made. And for a moment, I almost crumbled. But then something shifted inside me, some core of steel I didn't know I possessed, and I straightened my spine and looked her dead in the eye. "I'd rather struggle on my own than live in a golden cage," I told her. And that's when her hand flew across my face with a crack that seemed to echo through the entire universe. The slap stunned me more than it hurt, though my cheek burned like fire and I could taste blood where I'd bit my lip. My own mother had hit me, actually struck me, and the look in her eyes said she had zero regrets about it. "Get out," she said, her voice cold as ice now, all the heat and passion drained away into something harder and more permanent. "Get out of my house." I touched my face, feeling the welt already forming, and looked at my dad, silently begging him to intervene, to say something, anything, but he just stared at his plate like it was the most fascinating thing he'd ever seen. "Mom," I whispered, tears finally breaking through the dam I'd built, "you can't be serious." But she was serious as a heart attack, already marching to my room, throwing my clothes into garbage bags with a violence that spoke volumes. "You want to be independent so badly? Fine. Let's see how far your pride gets you when you're living on the streets." She literally threw my stuff out the front door onto the lawn where the neighbors could see, and I've never felt more humiliated in my entire life. I stood there on that lawn, surrounded by garbage bags full of my belongings, mascara running down my face, mixing with tears and probably some blood from my split lip, and I realized this was really happening. My mother was actually disowning me over a man I didn't love, over my refusal to be sold like cattle. Some of the neighbors had come out to watch the show, standing on their porches with their arms crossed and their judgmental stares, and I wanted to disappear into the ground. Mrs. Chen from next door at least had the decency to look sympathetic, but she didn't offer to help, didn't offer me a place to stay. Nobody did. Because in our tight-knit community, going against your parents was basically committing social suicide, and nobody wanted to be associated with the girl who'd embarrassed her family. My mother stood in the doorway like a sentinel, her arms crossed, her face made of stone, and she said the words that would echo in my nightmares for the next 11 years. "Don't bother coming back unless you're ready to apologize and do the right thing. You're dead to me until then." I loaded what I could into my beat-up Honda Civic, the car I'd bought myself working 2 jobs during college, and drove away without looking back, though every cell in my body wanted to turn around and beg for forgiveness, promise to marry Roberto, do anything to make this nightmare end. But I kept driving. tears blurring my vision so badly I had to pull over twice just to collect myself, my hands shaking on the steering wheel like I had hypothermia. I had exactly $1,247 in my bank account, a tank of gas, some clothes, my laptop, and absolutely nowhere to go. My friends from college had all moved away or weren't close enough to show up at their door in the middle of a personal crisis, and the few friends I had from high school still lived with their parents, who definitely would have heard about my family drama by morning. I drove to a Walmart parking lot and slept in my car that first night, curled up in the back seat with my winter coat as a blanket, crying until I had no tears left and my head pounded like someone was using it as a drum. The next few weeks were a blur of humiliation and survival that tested every ounce of strength I had. I couch surfed when I could, stayed at a women's shelter when I couldn't, and spent my days applying for jobs like my life depended on it. Because it did. The business degree I'd worked so hard for suddenly felt worthless because every entry-level position wanted 3 to 5 years of experience, which is basically corporate America's way of saying screw you to recent graduates.
I took what I could get, waitressing at a diner called Rosie's, where the owner, a tough-as-nails woman named Margaret, didn't ask questions about why a college graduate was serving eggs and bacon at 5 a.m. The tips were decent, the customers were mostly kind, and Margaret let me pick up as many shifts as I could handle, which turned out to be basically all of them because sleeping meant dreaming, and my dreams were full of my mother's face, twisted in disgust. I rented a room in a sketchy part of town from a woman named Paula, who had 5 cats, a smoking habit, and a tendency to watch Spanish soap operas at full volume until 2 a.m. But it was cheap and it was mine, and it had a door that locked. The room was barely big enough for a twin bed and a dresser, with peeling wallpaper and a window that didn't close all the way. But I made it work because I had to. I'd wake up at 4 a.m., shower in the shared bathroom, and head to the diner for the morning shift. Then I'd come home, change, and head to my afternoon job at a call center where angry people yelled at me about their cable bills for 8 hours straight. I'd get home around midnight, collapse into bed, and do it all over again the next day. I was exhausted. Constantly, running on caffeine and spite. But I was surviving, and that felt like a victory, even though it looked like defeat from the outside. I used my lunch breaks at the call center to take free online courses in digital marketing and web design, skills that were becoming increasingly valuable in 2014. I taught myself graphic design using YouTube tutorials and pirated software because I couldn't afford the real thing yet. I started a blog about surviving financial hardship and rebuilding your life. And while it didn't make money at first, it connected me to a community of people who understood struggle in a way my old friends never could. These were people who'd been kicked when they were down, who'd been written off by family or society, and who were clawing their way back to stability through sheer force of will. They became my real family, these strangers on the internet who cheered for my small victories and commiserated with my setbacks. 6 months after being thrown out, I was still working 2 jobs, still living in that crappy room with Paula and her cat army, but I'd saved up enough to buy a decent laptop and some software. I started freelancing on the side, taking on small graphic design projects for local businesses, building websites for people who were even more clueless about technology than I was when I started. The money was slow at first, $50 here, $100 there, but it added up. And more importantly, it gave me something my waitressing job never could. Hope. Hope that I could actually build something real, something that was mine, something that nobody could take away from me, no matter how much they disapproved of my choices. I worked until my eyes burned and my fingers cramped, surviving on ramen noodles and cheap coffee, but I was creating something, building a portfolio, making connections, and slowly, painfully slowly, things started to shift. That's when I met Daniel Walker at a community business networking event I dragged myself to despite being exhausted and not feeling like I belonged there. He was presenting about sustainable business practices and social entrepreneurship. And something about the way he talked, with passion but without arrogance, with confidence but without condescension, made me actually pay attention instead of just zoning out and stress eating the free cookies. After his presentation, I worked up the courage to approach him,
fully expecting to be blown off because guys like him, successful, put together, clearly going places, didn't usually give broke freelancers the time of day. But Daniel surprised me. He actually listened when I talked about my background, my goals, my crazy idea about starting a digital marketing consultancy that would focus on helping small businesses that couldn't afford the big agencies. Instead of laughing or dismissing me, he pulled out his business card and told me to email him my portfolio because he had some contacts who might need exactly the kind of services I was offering. I thought he was just being polite, doing that thing people do where they say, let's stay in touch with zero intention of following through. But Daniel actually responded to my email within 24 hours. He introduced me to 3 small business owners who needed help with their online presence, and just like that, I had clients, real paying clients who weren't just throwing me pity projects. The money still wasn't great, but it was better than minimum wage. And more than that, it was validation that I actually knew what I was doing, that my skills had value, that maybe I wasn't the worthless screw-up my mother had made me feel like. Daniel became a mentor, meeting me for coffee once a week to talk strategy, offering advice without being patronizing, connecting me to resources and opportunities I never would have found on my own. He believed in me when I barely believed in myself, and that made all the difference. Daniel and I started spending more time together, not just professional networking, but actual friendship, grabbing dinner after meetings, texting about random stuff, discovering we both had weird obsessions with true crime podcasts and terrible reality TV shows. He made me laugh for the first time in months, made me feel like I was more than just my circumstances. And somewhere along the way, friendship shifted into something deeper, something neither of us had planned or expected. He was 7 years older than me, already established in his career, but he never made me feel less than because I was still building. When I finally told him about my family, about the arranged marriage and the slap and being thrown out, he never made me feel judged or pitied. Instead, he just held my hand and said, "That took incredible courage, and you should be proud of yourself for knowing what you wanted and refusing to settle." We started dating officially about 8 months after we met, and it was different from any relationship I'd had before because it was built on actual partnership and respect, rather than just attraction or convenience. Daniel pushed me to take risks with my business, encouraged me to raise my rates when imposter syndrome had me charging way less than I was worth, celebrated my wins like they were his own. His family welcomed me without the drama and conditions I'd grown up with. His mom actually asked me about my goals and seemed genuinely interested in the answers. His dad treated me like an adult, capable of making my own decisions. Radical concepts that took some getting used to. For the first time since being kicked out, I felt like maybe I could build a real life. Not just survive, but actually thrive. 2 years after that awful day on my parents' lawn, my freelance business had grown enough that I quit both my other jobs and went full-time with my digital marketing consultancy. I was terrified, absolutely convinced I'd fail and end up back in my par. But Daniel believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. I landed my first major client, a regional restaurant chain that needed a complete rebrand and online overhaul, and the project paid more than I'd made in 6 months of waitressing. That success led to referrals, which led to more clients, which led to me actually needing to hire help. I brought on 2 part-time contractors, both young women who reminded me of myself when I was struggling, and I made sure to pay them fairly and treat them with respect because I remembered what it felt like to be desperate and undervalued. The business grew faster than I could have imagined, and I think part of it was because I was hungry in a way people who've always had safety nets just aren't. I worked like someone who knew exactly what it felt like to have nothing, and I never took a single opportunity for granted. I reinvested everything back into the business, took courses to stay ahead of digital marketing trends, and built a reputation for being reliable, creative, and genuinely invested in my clients' success. By year 3, I had enough saved to move out of Paula's place, though I still sent her Christmas cards because she housed me when I had nowhere else to go, and into a real apartment with Daniel. By year 4, we were talking about the future, about marriage and kids, and building something permanent together. Daniel proposed on a random Tuesday night, no fancy restaurant or elaborate production, just the 2 of us on our couch after a long day, and he said, "I want to spend my life with you, building whatever comes next together." I said yes without hesitation because he saw me, actually saw me, not some idealized version he wanted to mold me into, not a status symbol or a trophy, but the real me with all my scars and ambitions and messy, complicated feelings about family. We got married at City Hall with 2 witnesses we grabbed from the street, and it was perfect because it was ours, chosen without pressure or expectations from anyone else. My wedding day didn't have my father walking me down the aisle or my mother crying tears of joy, and yeah, that hurt in a way that ached deep in my bones. But I also knew that if they'd been there, it would have come with strings and conditions and the constant feeling that I owed them something. Our daughter, Sophia, came into the world 3 years after I'd been thrown out. And holding her in the hospital, looking at this tiny, perfect human that Daniel and I had created, I felt this overwhelming mix of joy and grief. Joy because she was here and healthy and ours. Grief because my mother would never know her granddaughter, would never see the life I'd built from nothing. I thought about reaching out so many times during my pregnancy, imagined calling my parents and telling them they were going to be grandparents, fantasized about my mother breaking down and apologizing and begging to be part of our lives. But every time I got close to picking up the phone, I remembered the slap, remembered the garbage bags on the lawn, remembered her calling me a disgrace. And I realized that I didn't want Sophia growing up thinking that kind of conditional love was normal or acceptable. Sophia became my whole world. This little person who looked at me like I hung the moon, who had no idea her grandmother had decided we weren't worth knowing. Daniel was an incredible father, the kind who changed diapers without complaining and woke up for 2 a.m. feedings and played endless games of peekaboo with genuine enthusiasm. We were building the family I'd never had, one based on mutual respect and unconditional love, and the understanding that we were choosing each other every single day. My business kept growing. I hired actual employees instead of just contractors, moved into a real office space, and started landing corporate clients that paid the kind of money I used to dream about. By the time Sophia was 2, my consultancy had 15 employees and had been featured in several business publications for our innovative approach to sustainable digital marketing. The bigger my business got, the more my story became part of the narrative. The founder who'd built everything from nothing, who'd been disowned by her family and turned that pain into fuel. Media outlets loved that angle, wanted to interview me about resilience and entrepreneurship and overcoming adversity. And while part of me was proud, another part felt exposed and vulnerable every time I had to talk about the worst day of my life for public consumption. I kept my parents' names out of it, never specified exactly what had caused the rift, but in our community, people talk, and I knew through the grapevine that my story had made it back to them. I heard from a distant cousin that my mother had seen an article about me in a business magazine and had torn it up without reading it, that my father had quietly kept a copy but hidden it from her. It hurt, even after all those years, even with everything I'd built. It still hurt that they couldn't be proud of me, couldn't be happy that I'd made something of myself despite their dire predictions. When Sophia turned 5, Daniel's company offered him an opportunity that would change everything. A position heading up their West Coast operations, based in Los Angeles, with a salary that made my eyes water even though I was doing well myself. We talked about it for weeks, weighing the pros and cons, and ultimately decided that California represented a fresh start, a place where my past wouldn't follow me around like a shadow. We sold our modest house, packed up our lives, and moved across the country to a place where nobody knew my story, where I could be just Jenna, successful business owner and mom, without the constant undercurrent of family drama. I opened a second office in LA, which meant I was now running bi-coastal operations. And it was challenging and exhausting and absolutely exhilarating in a way I couldn't quite explain. The Los Angeles office exploded. Turns out tech startups and entertainment companies had been desperate for the kind of authentic, story-driven marketing my team specialized in. Within 18 months, my West Coast branch was outperforming the East Coast location, and I made the difficult decision to make LA our primary headquarters. The company had grown to 45 employees. We'd been acquired by a larger marketing firm for an amount of money that made me physically dizzy when I saw the number. But I'd negotiated to stay on a CEO with complete creative control. The girl who'd slept in her car in a Walmart parking lot was now running a multi-million-dollar operation, and sometimes I had to pinch myself to believe it was real. Sophia was thriving, confident and curious, and completely herself in a way I'd never been allowed to be as a child. She wanted to be a veterinarian one week and an astronaut the next, and we encouraged every dream without trying to mold her into what we thought she should be. Daniel and I made it a point to never use love as a weapon, to never make Sophia feel like our approval was conditional on her conforming to our expectations. 8 years after moving to California, I got a call that I'd been selected as one of the keynote speakers for a major business conference in Chicago, right in my hometown, the place I'd fled from with everything I owned in garbage bags. My first instinct was to decline, to avoid the possibility of running into anyone from my old life. But Daniel encouraged me to go, to face those demons and claim my victory. "You've earned the right to stand on that stage," he told me. "Don't let old fears keep you from opportunities you've worked your ass off for." So I accepted. And as the date got closer, I felt this mix of anxiety and anticipation building in my chest like a storm about to break. I decided to make it a family trip, bringing Daniel and Sophia with me, and I splurged on things I never could have imagined affording in my old life. We flew first class for the first time ever, and Sophia's face when she saw the big leather seats and the flight attendant brought her cookies made every penny worth it. I'd arranged for a car service, not because I couldn't drive myself, but because I wanted to arrive at that conference like the success story I'd become. We stayed at a 5-star hotel downtown, and I bought a designer suit for my keynote that probably cost more than a month's rent in my old apartment. This wasn't about showing off, it was about showing up, about reclaiming space in a city that had witnessed my humiliation and proving that I'd not only survived, but thrived. The morning of my keynote, I was a bundle of nerves, practicing my speech in the hotel mirror while Daniel reassured me and Sophia colored pictures at the desk. The conference center was massive, and my keynote was scheduled for the main stage with an expected audience of over 2,000 people. As I waited backstage, hearing the buzz of the crowd and the introduction, I thought about that 22-year-old girl crying in a Walmart parking lot and wished I could tell her that it would all be okay, that the pain would transform into power, that she was so much stronger than she knew. Then I heard my name. Please welcome Jenna Martinez Walker, CEO of Authentic Digital Solutions. And I walked onto that stage with my head held high and my voice steady, ready to tell my story my way. The keynote went better than I could have imagined. The audience was engaged, laughing at my jokes, leaning forward during the emotional parts, and giving me a standing ovation at the end that brought tears to my eyes. Afterwards, during the networking session, I was surrounded by people wanting to connect, to hear more about my journey, to talk business. That's when I saw them. My parents, standing at the edge of the crowd, looking older and smaller than I remembered. My mother's hair had gone completely gray, and my father had developed a stoop in his shoulders that made him look defeated. They'd clearly come specifically to see me speak, had probably seen the conference schedule and made the trip, and for a moment I felt like that 22-year-old girl again, vulnerable and desperate for their approval. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I excused myself from the conversation I was in and walked over to them. Not sure what I was going to say or do, just knowing that this moment had been 11 years in the making. My mother opened her mouth to speak first, but I held up my hand. "Before you say anything," I told her, my voice calm but firm, "I need you to understand something. I didn't come back here to prove anything to you. I didn't build my company or my life to show you that you were wrong, though you were. I did it for me because I refused to let your rejection define who I became. The people nearby had started to notice the tension, backing away to give us space, and I could feel Daniel's supportive presence behind me, though he stayed back to let me handle this my way.
My mother looked like she wanted to say something defensive to justify the past, but my father put his hand on her arm. "We saw your speech," he said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. "We've been following your success for years, Jenna. We're—" He paused, struggling with words. "We're proud of you." Proud. The word I'd wanted to hear for so long, and now that it was offered, it felt hollow. Too little, too late. "You were proud of the money and the status," I corrected him, "but you weren't proud of me when I was brave enough to choose my own path. You weren't proud when I refused to be sold to a man I didn't love. You weren't proud when I was working 2 jobs and sleeping in my car, trying to survive after you threw me away like I was nothing." That's when Sophia appeared at my side, having escaped from Daniel's watchful eye, tugging on my suit jacket. "Mommy, who are these people?" she asked innocently, and I saw my mother's face crumble as she looked at her granddaughter for the first time. "These are—" I started, not sure how to introduce them, not sure I even wanted to. But Sophia was looking up at me with those big, curious eyes that expected honesty from me the way I'd always given it to her. "These are my parents, baby, your grandparents." Sophia studied them with the brutal honesty of a 7-year-old, and then said, "Why haven't I met you before?" "Mommy, you said family is the people who love you no matter what." Out of the mouths of babes, right? My daughter had just summarized the entire problem in one innocent observation. My mother knelt down, tears streaming down her face, reaching out like she wanted to touch Sophia, but afraid she'd be rejected. And honestly, she should have been afraid, because I was this close to just walking away with my family and never looking back. "We made a terrible mistake," she whispered, not to Sophia, but to me. "I made a terrible mistake. 11 years too late, the apology I'd once desperately wanted, and now I just felt tired." "You called me a disgrace," I said, my voice steady, despite the emotions churning in my chest. "You slapped me and threw me out of your house because I wanted to make my own choices. And for 11 years, while I struggled and built and fought for everything I have, you didn't reach out once. Not once. So forgive me if your regret now, when I've clearly made it despite you rather than because of you, feels a little convenient." The crowd around us had fully stopped pretending not to listen, and I realized we were creating a scene at one of the biggest business conferences of the year. But I was beyond caring about appearances. Daniel stepped up then, putting his arm around my shoulders in solidarity, and Sophia pressed against my leg, sensing the tension even if she didn't fully understand it. "Jenna," my father said, his voice breaking, "your mother was wrong to do what she did, and I was wrong to let it happen. We've regretted it every single day. But we were too proud, too stubborn to admit it. Seeing you up on that stage, hearing about everything you've accomplished, hearing you talk about building a family based on unconditional love, it destroyed us because we knew we'd lost that chance with you."
You didn't lose that chance, I corrected him. You threw it away. There's a difference. My mother was full on sobbing now, and part of me wanted to comfort her the way daughters are conditioned to comfort their mothers, but a bigger part of me knew that she needed to feel this, needed to understand the weight of what she'd done. "I spent years thinking I was the problem," I continued, my voice getting stronger. "Years thinking that maybe I should have just sucked it up and married Roberto, that maybe I was selfish for wanting to choose my own life. Do you know what that kind of doubt does to a person? How it makes you second-guess every decision, every instinct? I had to rebuild not just my life, but my entire sense of self-worth from scratch because you convinced me I was worthless without your approval." "You were never worthless," my mother choked out. "I was scared. I was scared you'd struggle, that you'd suffer, and I thought Roberto could give you security. I was trying to protect you." That's the excuse of every controlling parent throughout history. I was trying to protect you. You were trying to control me, I shot back. There's a difference between protection and control. Protection would have been supporting my dreams while making sure I had a safety net. Control was trying to sell me off to a man old enough to be my father because it would make your life better, boost your social status, give you bragging rights at church. The truth of that statement hung in the air between us, undeniable and uncomfortable. Sophia tugged on my hand again. "Mommy, are you okay?" she asked, and her concern for me, her instinct to check on my emotional state, reminded me exactly why I'd built the life I had. "I'm okay, baby," I assured her, kneeling down to her level. Sometimes grown-ups have to have hard conversations about things that happened a long time ago. She nodded like that made perfect sense and then looked at my parents again. "If you made my mommy cry, that wasn't very nice," she said with the blunt honesty that only children possess, and my mother actually flinched like she'd been physically struck. Out of everything I'd said, somehow my 7-year-old's simple observation seemed to hit hardest. Because kids don't deal in complications and justifications. They just know right from wrong in a way adults forget how to access. I stood back up, taking Sophia's hand in mine, and looked at my parents with eyes that had seen too much to be naive anymore. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, my voice steady and clear, despite the chaos of emotions swirling inside me. "I'm not going to pretend the last 11 years didn't happen. I'm not going to sweep your rejection under the rug and play happy family because it makes everyone comfortable. What you did changed me fundamentally, and I can't undo that damage just because you're finally ready to acknowledge it was wrong."
My mother opened her mouth to protest, but I kept going because I'd waited 11 years to say these words, and I wasn't going to be interrupted. But I'm also not going to be cruel for the sake of being cruel, because that's not who I am. And more importantly, that's not who I want Sophia to learn to be. So if you want to be part of our lives, it's going to be on my terms, at my pace, and with the understanding that trust isn't given, it's earned. Slowly, over time, through consistent actions that match your words. My father nodded slowly, understanding that this was probably the best offer they were going to get, but my mother looked like she wanted to argue. Wanted to demand immediate forgiveness and reconciliation because admitting fault was supposed to be enough. "That's not fair," she started, and I actually laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that surprised even me. "Not fair? You want to talk about fair after you disowned your only daughter for refusing an arranged marriage in the 21st century? After you physically assaulted me and threw me out with nothing? After you spent 11 years pretending I didn't exist?" The absurdity of her claim hit me so hard, I had to take a breath to keep from completely losing it. Fair would have been you supporting me when I chose my own path. Fair would have been you calling to check if I was alive during those first horrible months. Fair would have been you swallowing your pride at any point in the last decade and reaching out to apologize. So no, Mom, you don't get to dictate what's fair anymore. Daniel had been quiet this whole time, letting me handle it. But he spoke up now with that calm authority he had that made people actually listen. "What Jenna is offering you is more grace than most people would give after what you did," he said, his tone respectful but firm. "I'd suggest you take it and be grateful, because she has every right to walk away from you permanently and never look back." My parents both seemed to realize in that moment that they weren't dealing with the scared 22-year-old who desperately wanted their approval. They were dealing with a successful, confident woman who'd built an entire life without them, who had a husband who had her back completely, and who didn't need them for anything except the closure that comes from standing your ground. "What do we need to do?" my father asked quietly, and I appreciated that he understood this wasn't about grand gestures or quick fixes. "For now, nothing," I told him honestly. "I need time to process this, to figure out what I want and what's healthy for my family. Give me your contact information, and when I'm ready, if I'm ready, I'll reach out. And understand that if you push, if you show up unannounced or try to force this relationship, I will cut you off completely and permanently without hesitation." That might sound harsh to people who haven't lived through family trauma, but anyone who has knows that boundaries aren't mean, they're survival. And teaching people how to treat you is the most fundamental form of self-respect.
My mother fumbled in her purse for a piece of paper and wrote down their phone numbers and email addresses with shaking hands. And I could see she wanted to say so much more, wanted to explain and justify and beg for instant forgiveness. But for once in her life, she stayed quiet. My father pulled out his wallet and handed me a worn photograph. And when I looked at it, my breath caught. It was me at my college graduation, smiling huge. And the picture was so worn and faded, it was clear he'd carried it and looked at it regularly for years. "I kept this," he said quietly. "I know it doesn't change anything, but I kept it. I was always proud of you, Jenna. I was just too much of a coward to stand up to your mother, and I've regretted that weakness every day since." That admission, the vulnerability in it, cracked something in my armor that even my mother's tears hadn't managed to touch, because my father had never been the villain in this story. He'd been the enabler, the bystander, and in some ways that was worse because he'd known better but lacked the courage to act. "I needed you to stand up for me," I told him, my voice thick with emotion I hadn't wanted to show. "That day when she was throwing my stuff on the lawn, when she hit me, I needed you to be my father, and you just sat there and let it happen." He nodded, tears streaming down his face, not trying to defend himself because we both knew there was no defense. "I know," he whispered, "and I'll never forgive myself for that. Never." Sophia, who'd been watching this whole exchange with wide eyes, suddenly announced, "I'm hungry, and this is boring. Can we get ice cream?" The tension broke slightly at her perfect child timing, and I actually smiled despite everything because she was right. This was heavy adult stuff, and she deserved better than to stand in a conference center watching her mom confront ancient family trauma. "Yeah, baby, we can get ice cream," I told her, grateful for the excuse to end this conversation before I completely broke down. I looked at my parents one final time, taking in how much they'd aged, how much smaller and sadder they looked than the powerful figures from my memories. "I'll be in touch," I said simply, not promising when or even definitely that I would, just leaving the possibility open because completely closing that door felt wrong, even if keeping it cracked open hurt. We walked away, the three of us, me, Daniel, and Sophia, and I couldn't look back even though I could feel my parents' eyes on us, probably taking in every detail of the granddaughter they'd never known, the son-in-law they'd never met, the life they'd excluded themselves from through their own actions. Once we were outside, the late spring air hit my face, and I realized I'd been holding my breath, my whole body tense like I'd been preparing for physical combat. Daniel pulled me into a hug right there on the sidewalk, while Sophia skipped ahead looking for the car service. And I actually smiled despite everything, because she was right. This was heavy adult stuff, and she deserved better than to stand in a conference center watching her mom confront ancient family trauma. "Yeah, baby, we can get ice cream," I told her, grateful for the excuse to end this conversation before I completely broke down. I looked at my parents one final time, taking in how much they'd aged, how much smaller and sadder they looked than the powerful figures from my memories. "I'll be in touch," I said simply, not promising when or even definitely that I would, just leaving the possibility open, because completely closing that door felt wrong, even if keeping it cracked open hurt. "You did so good," he murmured into my hair, holding me tight. "I'm so proud of you for standing your ground and setting boundaries." That's what I'd needed to hear. Not that I'd been nice enough or forgiving enough, but that I'd advocated for myself and protected my peace. We got Sophia her ice cream, chocolate chip cookie dough, her favorite, and sat in the park watching her play on the swings while I processed everything that had just happened. "Do you think I was too harsh?" I asked Daniel, still second-guessing myself the way adult children of toxic parents always do. "No," he said firmly. "I think you were honest, and I think you're protecting yourself and Sophia from people who've proven they'll withdraw love when you don't meet their expectations. That's not harsh. That's healthy." Over the next few months, I did reach out to my parents, slowly and cautiously, like testing whether a frozen pond would hold your weight.
We started with emails, neutral updates about Sophia and my business, nothing too personal or vulnerable. My mother's responses were always long and rambling, full of explanations and justifications I didn't ask for. But I could see she was trying in her way, even if it wasn't the way I needed. My father's emails were shorter but more genuine, asking about Sophia's interests and my work without trying to insert himself where he didn't belong. Eventually, we graduated to phone calls, brief and surface level at first, then gradually deeper as I tested whether they could respect my boundaries or whether they'd revert to old patterns. The real test came when my mother asked if they could visit, could meet Sophia properly and see our home, and I had to sit with that request for weeks before deciding. I talked it through in therapy. Yeah, I'd been seeing a therapist since building my business because successful people in healthy relationships still need mental health support, and that shouldn't be stigmatized. My therapist helped me understand that I could allow them limited access to my life without giving them the power to hurt me again. That boundaries weren't walls, they were doors I controlled. So, I agreed to a visit with strict conditions. They'd stay in a hotel, not our home. Visits would be time-limited and structured, and the first sign of disrespect or boundary violation would end the relationship permanently. They came to California in the fall, and seeing them in my space, my beautiful home that I'd earned through blood, sweat, and tears, my life that existed completely independently of them, was surreal. My mother cried when she saw Sophia's room full of books and art supplies and all the tools for exploration and creativity, and I realized she was mourning all the moments she'd missed, all the memories she'd excluded herself from. Sophia was polite but cautious around them, sensing my tension and taking her cues from me about how to interact with these strangers who claimed to be family.
We took them around the city, showed them my office where my team worked on campaigns that reached millions of people, introduced them to Daniel's parents, who'd become the grandparents Sophia actually knew. The contrast was stark and uncomfortable. Daniel's folks knew Sophia's favorite foods, her fears, her dreams, had inside jokes with her and a relationship built over years, while my parents were basically strangers trying to catch up on a lifetime in a weekend. At one point, my mother watched Sophia and Daniel's mother baking cookies together, laughing and covered in flour, and she turned to me with this devastating sadness in her eyes. "I should have been there for that," she said. "For all of it." And I couldn't disagree, couldn't comfort her, could only nod and say, "Yes, you should have." The visit was emotionally exhausting, but also healing in ways I hadn't expected, because seeing them in my world, rather than me returning to theirs, shifted the power dynamic completely. They were the supplicants now, the ones asking for acceptance and grace, and that reversal helped me understand that I'd truly moved beyond needing their approval. Before they left, my mother asked if they could take Sophia to the park alone, just for an hour, and I saw my father shoot her a look like she was pushing too hard too fast. I appreciated his awareness that they hadn't earned that level of trust yet, and I gently declined. "Maybe next visit," I said. "If there is a next visit." That conditional statement hung in the air, a reminder that their place in my life was probationary, not guaranteed. They returned to Chicago, and life went on. We stayed in touch more regularly, though I maintained strict boundaries about how much emotional labor I was willing to invest in rebuilding the relationship. My mother struggled with this. She wanted instant intimacy, wanted to jump to being the grandmother at every birthday party and school event, wanted to erase the missing years through sheer force of presence. But I held firm, explaining over and over that trust rebuilds slowly, and that pushing me would only create more distance. My father seemed to understand better, content to take whatever relationship I was willing to give without demanding more. And gradually, over months and then years, something resembling a relationship emerged from the ashes. But here's what nobody tells you about reconciliation. It doesn't erase the damage. My parents and I would never have the relationship we might have had if they'd supported me from the beginning. There would always be this chasm between us filled with missing years and unhealed wounds and the fundamental knowledge that their love had once been conditional.
Sophia would never run to them the way she ran to Daniel's parents, never fully trust them the way she trusted the adults who'd been consistently present in her life. They'd earned their way back to the margins of our world, but they'd never be at the center, and that was a consequence they had to live with. What they did gain was the privilege of watching from a distance as Sophia grew into an incredible young woman who knew her own mind and never doubted that her parents loved her unconditionally. They got to see me continue building my business until it became one of the top digital marketing firms in the country, recognized internationally for innovative campaigns and ethical business practices. They got to witness Daniel and me building the kind of partnership that weathers storms because it's built on equality and mutual respect rather than obligation and tradition. And maybe that was their real punishment? Not being excluded entirely, but getting just enough access to see everything they'd almost destroyed through their need to control.
Years later, when Sophia was applying to colleges and writing her personal essay, she asked me about my story, about why she'd only met her maternal grandparents when she was 7, and why our relationship with them was so different from the one she had with Daniel's family. I told her the truth. Age-appropriate, but honest, because I never wanted her to learn that love could be weaponized or that family meant accepting mistreatment. She wrote her essay about generational cycles and the courage it takes to break them, about how sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to pass trauma to the next generation. When she read it to me, I cried harder than I had during that confrontation at the conference, because this was the real victory. Not my business success or my financial stability, but raising a daughter who understood that she deserved unconditional love and wouldn't settle for less. My mother called after Sophia graduated high school, asking if we could talk, really talk, without Daniel or Sophia or anyone else, just the two of us. Part of me wanted to say no, wanted to maintain my carefully constructed boundaries, but another part was curious what she wanted to say after all these years. We met at a coffee shop halfway between our homes. I'd flown to Chicago for Sophia's college campus tours. And seeing my mother across the table, now in her 70s, with hands that shook slightly from age, I felt something shift. "I need to say this before I die," she started. And that opening hit me hard, because death brings perspective that nothing else can. What I did to you was unforgivable. Not just wrong, unforgivable. I took my own fears and insecurities and projected them onto you. Tried to control your life because I felt powerless in my own. And when you refused to comply, I punished you in the cruelest way I could. This wasn't the defensive justifications I'd heard before. This was actual accountability, naked and raw and uncomfortable. "I've spent years in therapy," she continued, and that surprised me because my mother had always dismissed therapy as something weak people needed, trying to understand why I did what I did. And here's what I learned. I didn't believe in myself, so I didn't believe in you. I'd given up my own dreams to marry your father, told myself it was the practical choice, the safe choice. And when you refused to do the same, it was like you were rejecting the sacrifice I'd made, proving that I had given up for nothing. Her voice cracked, and I could see this admission cost her something real. That's not an excuse. There is no excuse. But it's the truth. I hurt you because seeing you choose yourself reminded me of all the times I didn't. It was easier to try to force you into the same cage I had accepted than to acknowledge I'd locked myself in for no good reason. We talked for hours, really talked for the first time in my entire life, and I learned things about my mother I'd never known. How she'd been engaged before my father to someone her parents disapproved of and had broken it off to please them. How she'd struggled with depression after I was born, but had hidden it because mental health wasn't discussed in our community. How she'd watched me grow up with so much potential and felt terrified I'd waste it the way she felt she'd wasted hers. None of it excused what she'd done, but it humanized her in a way that made forgiveness feel less like surrender and more like freedom. Freedom from carrying the weight of her sins, freedom from defining myself in opposition to her, freedom to acknowledge that hurt people, and that breaking that cycle required understanding, not just anger. I don't know if I can ever fully forgive you, I told her honestly, because even after all these years, that wound went deep. The scar is permanent, Mom. You can't hit your child and throw them out and expect that to just go away, no matter how many apologies come later. She nodded, accepting this truth without argument. I know, she said. And I'm not asking for forgiveness because I don't deserve it. I'm just asking that you know I understand what I did, that I've spent every day since wishing I could take it back, and that watching you succeed despite me has been both my greatest pride and my deepest shame. That paradox, pride and shame existing simultaneously, captured the complexity of our relationship better than anything else could. When Sophia started her freshman year at Northwestern, ironically just miles from where I'd grown up and been rejected, my parents asked if they could take her to dinner occasionally, be a small part of her college experience. Sophia, now 18 and capable of making her own choices, surprised me by saying yes. Mom, I know they hurt you badly, and I know our relationship with them will never be what it could have been, but they're old and they're trying, and I think I can have a relationship with them that's separate from your history with them. Is that okay? That's when I knew I'd done something right as a parent. She felt secure enough in my love to explore her own connection with my parents without worrying it would hurt me. Watching Sophia build her own relationship with my parents taught me something I hadn't expected, that forgiveness isn't a single moment or decision. It's a practice, something you choose over and over in small ways. Every time my mother called and I answered instead of sending it to voicemail, that was forgiveness. Every time my father sent a card and I acknowledged it, that was forgiveness. Every time I let them be part of family events without holding their past mistakes over their heads like a sword, that was forgiveness. It wasn't the dramatic, cathartic moment I'd always imagined. It was mundane and repetitive and sometimes felt more like exhaustion than grace, but it was real. My business eventually sold to an international conglomerate for an amount that set up not just Sophia, but her future children and probably their children for life. The acquisition made headlines. "Local girl makes good," one particularly corny headline read. And I had to do a press tour that included stops in Chicago. During one interview, the journalist asked how I'd managed to build such a successful company from nothing, what drove me during those early difficult years, and I gave my standard answer about resilience and vision and opportunity. But then she asked, "Is it true your family disowned you when you were starting out?" And I had to decide in that moment how honest to be. "Yes," I said simply. "My mother and I had a fundamental disagreement about what my life should look like, and when I chose my own path, there were consequences. But here's what I've learned. Sometimes the people who should support you can't or won't, and you have two choices. You can let that define you and hold you back, or you can use it as fuel to prove that you never needed their permission to be extraordinary." I chose the latter, and while the journey was harder than it would have been with family support, it also made me stronger, more resilient, and absolutely certain that I could survive anything. The journalist asked if we'd reconciled, and I chose my words carefully. "We have a relationship now, but it's different, rebuilt rather than repaired, if that makes sense. Some things, once broken, don't go back to their original form. They become something new entirely." That interview went viral in business circles, and I got thousands of messages from people with similar stories, children who'd been disowned for being gay, for marrying outside their religion or race, for choosing careers their parents disapproved of, for simply insisting on autonomy over their own lives. Their stories were all different in the details, but identical in the core wound. The people who should have loved them unconditionally had made that love contingent on obedience. I started a mentorship program through my company specifically for young people estranged from their families, offering not just business advice, but the emotional support and belief in their potential that families should provide, but sometimes doesn't. Now, at 43 years old, with gray starting to thread through my hair and a business legacy I'm proud of,
I look back on that day when I was 22 and my mother slapped me, and I feel something I never expected: gratitude. Not for the pain, I wouldn't wish that on anyone, but for what the pain taught me about my own strength, about the difference between love and control, about the kind of parent and person I wanted to be. That rejection forced me to build a life completely on my own terms, to discover capabilities I might never have tapped into if I'd taken the easy road of compliance. It taught me that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the best thing that ever happened to you, not because the pain was valuable, but because your response to it was. My parents are in their late 70s now, dealing with the health issues that come with age, and there's a part of me that feels sad for them. Not pity, but genuine sadness that they spent so many years missing out on knowing me and Sophia because of pride and fear. My mother has mellowed with age, though I still see flashes of the controlling woman she was when she tries to give unsolicited advice or push boundaries I've set. My father has become more vocal, standing up to her now in ways he never did when I was young. And I think watching me succeed without their help taught him something about courage. They're part of our lives in the way distant relatives are, invited to major events, kept updated on important news, but not involved in the day-to-day intimacy that defines real family. Sophia graduated college with honors and decided to go into nonprofit work advocating for family estrangement survivors, and watching her take my pain and transform it into purpose for helping others made every hard moment worth it. She's dating someone wonderful who treats her with respect and sees her as an equal partner, and I know she learned what to look for in a relationship by watching Daniel and me build ours on mutual respect rather than traditional obligation. My legacy isn't just the business I built or the money I made. It's the cycle I broke, the example I set, the proof that you can survive rejection from the people who should love you most and still build something beautiful. Here's the moral of my story, the lesson I'd share with anyone facing impossible choices between family loyalty and personal authenticity. Your obligation to yourself is greater than your obligation to people who would diminish you, even if those people are family. Family isn't just biology. It's chosen, it's built, it's earned through consistent love and support, not demanded through guilt and obligation. The people who truly love you will support your dreams even when they don't understand them, will celebrate your choices even when they'd choose differently, will remain in your corner even when you disappoint them. And anyone who withdraws their love when you refuse to comply with their vision for your life is practicing control, not love. Walking away from toxic family isn't selfish or cruel, it's self-preservation. And there's no shame in choosing yourself when the alternative is losing yourself. You might feel guilty, might question your decision, might face judgment from people who don't understand that some family relationships are irreparably damaging. But on the other side of that guilt is freedom. Freedom to become exactly who you're meant to be without the weight of expectations that were never yours to carry. And if reconciliation comes later, if the people who rejected you eventually understand what they lost and try to make amends, you get to decide what that relationship looks like on your terms, with boundaries that protect your peace. My mother's slap and her words, "You're a disgrace," could have destroyed me. For a while, I let them nearly succeed, internalizing that rejection as truth about my worth. But eventually I realized that her words were never about me. They were about her fears, her regrets, her inability to imagine a different path. Stepping off that private jet 11 years later with my daughter and my success wasn't about revenge in the petty sense. It was about reclaiming the narrative, about showing up as proof that their rejection didn't define me, that I'd not only survived, but thrived, that the disgrace was never mine to carry. To anyone reading this who's been disowned, rejected, or made to feel less than because they chose authenticity over compliance, your story isn't over. The pain you feel right now, as real and devastating as it is, can become the foundation for something extraordinary if you refuse to let it crush you. You are not the villain for choosing yourself. You are not selfish for having boundaries. You are not obligated to sacrifice your dreams, your identity, or your happiness to make other people comfortable. And sometimes the family you build, through friendship, through partnership, through community, ends up being stronger than the family you were born into, precisely because it's based on acceptance rather than obligation. That 22-year-old girl crying in a Walmart parking lot convinced her life was over because her parents had rejected her, had no idea she was actually at the beginning of something incredible. I wish I could go back and tell her that the pain she's feeling is temporary, but the strength she'll gain from surviving it is permanent. That every rejection is redirecting her towards something better, that sometimes the trash takes itself out and makes room for people who will actually value her. But I can't go back. None of us can. We can only move forward, carrying our scars like badges of honor, proof that we survived what should have broken us and came out stronger on the other side. So yeah, they watched me step off that private jet, speechless, seeing everything they'd tried to prevent me from becoming. But the real victory wasn't their shock or regret. It was that I no longer needed their validation to know my worth. I'd built an entire life that proved my value, surrounded by people who loved me without conditions, raising a daughter who would never doubt her place in my heart. That's revenge in its purest form, not bitterness or anger, but success so complete that their opinion of you becomes irrelevant.